Squid Game, everyone knows Squid Games, right? It really got people thinking about, like, what would it be like to have to fight for your life?
Yeah.
But what if I told you there was a real story, even more messed up, like way worse, hidden behind, this front of a government welfare center?
It really makes you think, that sometimes the truth is just way scarier than any movie. And that's what we're looking at today, this crazy true story about this place called Brothers Home in South Korea.
Yeah, and we've got some pretty heavy stuff to go through today. We're going to be looking at some clips from this YouTuber called Rotten Mango. They talk to survivors, and what they went through is, well, you just have to hear it to believe it. It's dark, for sure, but these stories, they need to be heard.
Definitely. And to understand how something like Brothers Home could even happen, we need to step back in time to South Korea in the 70s and 80s. Think about it, a dictatorship trying to look good on the world stage, especially with the 1988 Olympics coming up.
Right, the Olympics, huge deal. They wanted to show off,
Yeah.
But what about the people who didn't fit that picture of success? What happened to them?
That's where this whole idea of social cleansing comes in. It sounds awful, right? But that's what Brothers Home was really for. They wanted to get rid of anyone they thought was undesirable. Homeless people, orphans, anyone with disabilities, even people who spoke out against the government.
So on the surface, it looked like this nice place, right? Like a welfare center funded by the government. But what was going on inside was a whole other story.
Exactly. Think about it. Huge walls, 30 feet high, topped with barbed wire. They were watching everyone all the time. The whole thing was super strict, and if you messed up, they'd beat you. It was more like a prison camp, not a place to help people.
And they tricked people into going there too, right?
Yeah.
Lied to them about what it was really like.
Yeah, that's another thing that's just so messed up about this whole thing. They were so calculated in how they controlled these people. And they didn't just control them, they used them to make money, profited off their misery.
Okay, hold on. What? How did they do that? I mean, turn suffering into a business.
Well, first of all, they got money from the government just for housing all these, quote, vagrants. Then they forced the residents to work in factories, making stuff to sell, and didn't pay them anything.
So basically slave labor.
Huh?
And wait, I heard they were selling the donations too, right? Like the clothes and food people sent to help the residents. They even sold the animals that were supposed to be food for the residents.
Absolutely. And there are even rumors, though it's never been proven, that they might have been doing even worse stuff, like taking organs or even selling bodies for medical research. It's really gruesome when you think about how far they were willing to go.
You mentioned these survival games you made the residents play. It's easy to think of Squid Game when you hear that, but this wasn't for fun or for money, was it?
Nope. No big prize waiting at the end. These games were all about hurting people, making them feel less than human, breaking their spirit. It was torture, plain and simple, just disguised as something else.
And those games, along with everything else that was going on there, I mean, it must have really messed up the survivors, right? Not just physical scars, but emotional ones too.
Yeah, one survivor talked about having to scrub themselves until they bled, even when they had open sores, using rough salt. Another person said they were so hungry they were eating pine cones and centipedes, anything just to feel full. Can you imagine living with that kind of fear and not having enough food all the time?
It's hard to wrap your head around it. And all this was happening under the government's nose. They knew and didn't do anything. So there was this one survivor, young, just a kid, 12 years old, and he actually managed to escape. He ran for his life, ended up on a military base.
You'd think, okay, he's safe now.
I know, that's what I thought too.
Wow.
But they sent him back to Brothers Home.
It just shows you how deep this whole thing went. The authorities, they were in on it. They knew it was happening, and they didn't care. Even if you got out, they'd just drag you back.
It's just, it's just awful. And there's this other story about Han and his sister. Their own dad, he was tricked too, thought he was taking them to safety, to a police station.
And the police, they were working with Brothers Home, right?
Yeah. Can you believe that? They were sending people there. So the dad, he totally trusted them, and they betrayed him like that.
It's who can you trust when the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones putting you in danger?
Han's sister, she was like a mama bear, She tried to escape with them multiple times, but every time they caught them, and they'd punish her right in front of them.
God, can you imagine being a kid and having to watch that, seeing someone you love getting hurt like that, and there's nothing you can do about it?
And the guards, they'd use it against him too. They'd say stuff about his sister, how she was losing it, all because of the torture. They were just, I don't even know what to call them, just monsters.
They knew exactly what they were doing, breaking these people, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. It was all calculated.
She ended up in a psychiatric ward, like totally out of it, drugged up. Han, he'd climb up to the window, try to see her, hoping that maybe, just maybe, if she saw him, it would bring her back.
That image, man, it breaks your heart. This kid clinging to this tiny shred of hope in this place that had taken everything from him.
And it gets worse. His dad shows up. He'd been tricked too, ended up at brother's home.
It's like you can't make this stuff up. The person who should be protecting you, trapped right there with you in this nightmare. Han talked about feeling like this rage, this hate for his dad because he thought his dad had abandoned them.
What happened to Han's sister, it's hard to even talk about. She was abused so badly, physically and sexually, and all because she was trying to protect her little brother.
It's just sickening. And it shows that women, they were often the ones who suffered the worst, the most brutal treatment. It's hard to even think about.
And they used religion, too. There's this big church on the compound. They had all these services, made everyone confess, beat people in front of everyone.
It was all about control, right? Making people afraid, making them obey.
Yeah, and they used it to get money, too. They'd ask for donations from churches, from people overseas, telling them they were helping these poor souls. It's disgusting how they twisted something good, something sacred, to get what they wanted.
The whole thing was a scam. From the forced labor to the fake donations, it was all about money. And they didn't care who they hurt to get it.
This wasn't just a few bad people, you know. It was the whole system, the government. They knew what was going on. It was corruption, plain and simple.
And it makes you wonder, what happened after they shut the place down? Did the survivors get justice? Did anyone pay for what they did?
That's what we're going to look at next. We're going to see what happened after Brothers' home, what happened to the people who were trapped there, and the people who were responsible for all that suffering. So they shut down Brothers' home, right? But they didn't punish anyone or anything. They just bulldozed the whole place. And guess what they built there? Apartments.
Yeah, it's like they were trying to just pretend it never happened, bury the past, and move on.
But the survivors, they weren't having it. They weren't going to let people forget. They protested for years right outside the National Assembly building, demanding justice, wanting someone to finally acknowledge what they went through.
It's amazing, really, how strong they were, how determined. They could have just tried to forget it all, but they wouldn't let it go. They wanted the people who did this to them to be held accountable.
I can't even imagine, having to relive all that trauma day after day just to get someone to listen. It must have been so painful.
Yeah, it took incredible courage to keep fighting like that. They were doing it for themselves, but also for the people who didn't make it out, the ones who couldn't speak for themselves.
So what of the people who ran Brothers' home? The guards, the people in the government who knew and did nothing. Did they ever face any consequences?
That's the part that's just so frustrating. Even after all that, the owners, they never faced justice. Some people say they left the country, that they're living it up somewhere else with all the money they stole.
It's not right. After all that suffering, there's no real resolution. It makes you think, anyone in power can do whatever they want, hurt people, exploit them, and get away with it.
It really makes you question, how does something like this happen, and how do we make sure it never happens again? How do we hold people accountable?
It's easy to think, oh, that was then, that was there. But this stuff, it's still happening. All over the world, people are being exploited, abused right now.
That's why it's so important to, pay attention, be aware, ask questions, challenge the people in charge. We can't just sit back and let it happen.
So what can we do? What can regular people do to make a difference?
I think it starts with learning. Read about what happened, listen to the survivors' stories, support organizations that are fighting against this kind of stuff, and don't be afraid to speak up, call out injustice when you see it, whether it's in your own town or across the world. Our voices matter.
If we stay silent, it's just like we're letting the bad guys win, right?
Yeah.
We have to speak up, demand justice. That's the only way things will change.
When we started talking about Brothers' home, we mentioned Squid Game. And, the games were scary, but what's really terrifying is that this stuff, the greed, the cruelty, it's not just in a TV show. It's real. It's happening.
But even with all that darkness, there's still hope. The survivors, they fought back. They never gave up on getting justice. It shows how strong the human spirit can be, even when things are so bad.
Their stories, they're a reminder of the worst of humanity, but also the best. We have to remember what happened, learn from it, and work to make sure it never happens again.
Thank you for listening to this this deep dive. It's tough to hear about this stuff, but it's important. We've got links in the show notes if you want to learn more about Brothers Home and the survivors. Keep learning, keep talking about it. That's how we make a difference.
Yeah, the fight for justice, it never really ends, and we all have a part to play in it.